The story of buildings of empire is about the history of the British Empire over the course of 3 or 4 centuries, told through the tales associated with a range of quite interesting, in fact fascinating buildings and building sites all across the globe. It's worth pointing out, I think, to start with, that this is not an architectural history. It is a history of the buildings and the sites on which they were built, which often overlaid buildings or sites of importance to indigenous people before the British arrived. And it's an attempt to look at key themes in the history of the British Empire and British imperialism through the prism of this rather eclectic range of a dozen, actually a baker's dozen, buildings and, I suppose, human constructions. Because it's not just about buildings, there are also references to things like the changes wrought by imperialism to the natural landscape. There's a garden featured as well. One of the featured sites is the Christchurch Botanical Gardens in New Zealand that were so recently damaged by the New Zealand earthquake. Because I think that that is one of the most important premises of the book, is that whilst we would tend to think about railways or English language or cricket as the usual legacies of empire that are trotted out, in actual fact the empire's impact upon the built environment and the natural world was its most indelible lasting legacy. And one of the things I found most fascinating about preparing this book and looking at the history of really diverse regions and buildings was the fact that all of the buildings in this book still remain and are still in use. So long after the British have departed, colonial rule has come to an end and vigorous new nation states have been born. These buildings, these infrastructures of transport, of defence, of waste management are still very much intact, because people still worship, people still travel, and people still administer very often things like governors' palaces or district commissioners' residences were simply taken over by incoming indigenous rulers once the British had departed. In the same way that the clubs of empire, these wonderful and picturesque buildings, particularly in India but also in Africa and the old dominions, are still very much in use to this day, because society has the same needs for, in this case, interaction and indeed social exclusion.